We should be online shortly now. We are live now. Sorry for the delay. Welcome everyone to CoLab National Innovation Dialogue. I'm Marian Sina, working for CoLab India program.
On the email body actually I share. So basically I'm just showing the structure that I wrote in the document.
I am Marian Sina. Working for CoLab India. CoLab is a regional program co-created by UNDP and the City Foundation and operational in 25 countries across the Asia-Pacific region. It is an initiative aimed to create an enabling ecosystem to promote youth leadership, innovation, and social entrepreneurship. CoLab was launched in India in 2019 in partnership with Tal Innovation Mission Niti Aayog. This is the 5th edition of the program. Today, we are hosting a panel discussion on the topic of financing sustainable entrepreneurship. Let me introduce you to our two panelists and moderators. We are happy to have Priya, which is the general partner of Tia Venture. It's a seed stage fund in India investing in high impact technology enabled climate tech business operating across multiple sectors. Priya has spent 15 years working across the social impact, finance, and policy sector in the US, UK, and Indian markets. Our second panelist is Shalandra. He is the president of Fintelix. Under his guidance, Fintelix closely monitors the evolving technology and regulatory landscape and continuously aligns the company's data platform and regulatory solution to enable financial institutions to maximize the value of data while meeting compliance requirements. Shalandra has more than 20 years of experience in the technology and financial sector. He is also involved with charitable organizations working to assist and empower disadvantaged people through education, vocational training, healthcare, and emergency relief. Thank you, both of you, to join us for this panel discussion. The panel will be moderated by Akriti. Akriti is the founder of Baula Natural. She is an entrepreneur with sensitivity to technology and innovation. She is working with thousands of rural community members on traceable, conscious, environmentally responsible products around agri and dairy. She participated to CoLab 2022-23 program. Over to you, Akriti.
Thank you so much, Marian, and welcome everybody. A special mention to both our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And, thanks for having us here.
And such an interesting topic to start with: sustainable enterprises and financing. I believe this is a topic, however much discussed, always leaves behind some questions unanswered for enterprises to explore, delve deeper, learn more about. While some ideas find their pathway to implementation, there are so many, a vast majority, I believe, that are left behind, especially the ones sitting in the most remote, disjointed locations for lack of financing. And so in light of that, we are very glad that the two of you have come with us and shall help us understand more about this sector, its aspirations, the challenges, and accessibility to those who address the most critical challenges. Am I audible? Yeah. So, accessibility to the most critical challenges that enterprises are addressing that the world as a whole today is marred with. If I may start with today's discussion, Shelley, I would like to start with you, a term that we have mutually agreed on addressing Mr. Shailendra as. So as someone who's been keeping a tab on the data, finance, technology evolution, and has been supporting startups for their adaptability to these evolutions, if you may please shed some light on what are some of the hot sectors that you are looking for to invest in today?
Yeah, so I think SDG covers a lot of subsectors, right? It's a very broad umbrella. And you could really find sustainability objectives within pretty much every industry that you can think of. You've seen that in the past few years, renewable energy. Sorry, I hear some background noise. So renewable energy and electric vehicles, mobility, and all the digital technologies, right, that are driving some of these sustainability goals. I think these have really taken off very well. They're sectors that found a lot of traction. They found a lot of investors. They've scaled. I was just looking up some stats before we got into this discussion. As of today, if I say digital technologies that enable sustainability, we have some 8,000 plus health tech companies, 11,000 plus ed tech companies, 2,000 plus fintech companies, and 1,000 odd agri-tech companies in India. Those are a lot, right? So a lot is being done, and many of these have been funded. They are exploring opportunities to kind of build around sustainability themes. There are also a few emerging areas where investments have still not flown in, or they are yet to take off fully. While agri-tech, we've seen some investments going. I believe that into more sustainable agriculture, into more precision agriculture, there is a lot more to be done, which is more operationally heavy. It is not just the agri-tech purely from aggregating the commerce around agri inputs and outputs, but more operationalizing the precision agricultural practices. I'd say there is a lot more to be done in that space, and there are opportunities there. I would call that as one of the hot spaces. The other one I would say is hot, from my perspective, is sustainable travel. I think there has been this is kind of contrary to the view that everything is getting digitized. The whole world is being augmented with digital applications, which is all true. But given the travel sector is opened up now post pandemic, people are looking to have unique experiences. I believe that they will also want digital detox every now and then when they think about travel and leisure. I feel sustainable travel, which could be ecotourism in nature, which could be integrated travel with communities, being blending with local cultures. That kind of space could also be very interesting, from a sustainability angle. And lastly, I think food tech and climate tech are two areas that I'm also watching that could potentially have some opportunities.
That's wonderful. Very comprehensive, I believe. Thank you so much, Kelly. And moving now on to Priya. Priya, I have so many questions from you, because I myself am I'm an entrepreneur working in solving the climate crisis through the efforts that we at Bahula work on with the agro-pastoral communities in the extreme desert bioregions. And so basis my experience with how the startup culture is, with how social enterprises get to approach investors or speak the financier language, if that's a term I may call it. So you've been working as an incubator and mentor, and of course, mentoring so many climate conscious startups. And as somebody who's in that work myself, I have come to this everyday reality that climate change is no more just another chapter in our books. It's very real, it's very visible. It's it's something that we are experiencing in our everyday activities. And there are so many examples to substantiate that. Rural communities, rural India, is the most disadvantaged sector in this entire regard. However, when we talk of climate financing, how do you believe that we can ensure that this vocabulary, this language can be accessible or comprehensible to the people who are standing on the brink of, if I may dare to even call it, the sidelines of the mainstream climate action investments? People who are living in disjointed regions and completely away from the urban sphere. So how do you think, if you could suggest something around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Akriti, for the question. Thank you, Marian, from the team from UNDP, having me here today, being part of this panel. So yes, actually, we've been an investor, not an incubator, over the last couple of years, investing in climate tech companies. And the kind of companies that we invest in are more commercial in nature. So these are entrepreneurs that are raising, return-oriented capital from return-oriented investors, and looking to essentially tap into technologies that are defensible, have a USP, and eventually can grow and disrupt a market opportunity. So just to give you a background, we've invested in companies in smart grid, battery management, fast charging and EV, battery recycling, carbon markets, sustainable biomaterials, and also energy data management. And I completely take your point. I think there are so many vulnerable communities in the developing world, especially in India, who are most affected by the whole climate crisis. And as we know, the UN has released the IPCC report, which claimed that there has been a 1.2 degree increase in temperatures, global temperatures over the last 150 years, and we're projected to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030, and will reach 2 degrees if drastic measures are not done, in terms of net zero commitments and managing all of the sort of adaptation and mitigation mechanisms to basically do both carbon removal as well as carbon offsets. So I think it's really important to understand that a lot of the repercussions that we as a population and industry, so both consumer, industry, etc., are really impacting all different parts of the environment. And climate tech is actually an amalgamation of many different sectors. So earlier, a decade ago, when we were thinking, we as in the investor community were thinking about investing into climate, it was mainly through clean energy solutions. So basically energy transitions, clean fuels, alternative to coal-fired grid, and power transmission. And that usually the innovations were in solar and wind and hydro, etc. Now, actually, climate is much more of a all-encompassing, multidisciplinary set of sectors, where you have, as Shailendra pointed out, also electric mobility, you have battery technologies, you have green hydrogen, you have biofuels, you have carbon markets, climate risk, you have property technology and the built environment, etc. So there's a huge amount of innovation happening. And I think when you mentioned financing, there is a very important kind of, I would say, intervention that needs to be made, I would say, on the policy side as well as on the investor side. So there's three kinds of capital typically that companies, early stage companies look for. One is equity, the second is debt, and the third is grant capital. And I would say that for rural entrepreneurs or rural communities, the kinds that you work with, it could be very beneficial to explore different kinds of grant programs. And I know the government has also initiated through the Union Budget of 2023 a huge amount of support in terms of schemes for mangroves, for forests, for different kinds of biofertilizers in these areas, ocean coastline projects. And these will really help to benefit and restabilize a lot of the communities that have been displaced by industrial action and also deforestation initiatives as well. So I think that in itself is a good capacity building activity. In addition to that, I think there's a lot of private companies working around carbon farming, or rather carbon sequestration in soil, and training farmer communities to basically do soil sort of organic soil practices, regenerative agriculture, and to another point that Shailendra raised about, making sure that the agriculture is 70% of India's economy. So we have to make sure that this kind of on the cultivation side, that it actually produces, that sort of oxygen, in terms of replanting of trees, and that lends itself back to a sort of positive climate, but also that populations that are involved in this are aware of climate conscious agriculture and that are actually practicing it daily. So these are the kinds of areas that I would imagine would need emphasis beyond just the private sector. And that's where we don't actually have an immediate remit being a private investor, but we are part of many dialogues that are looking to activate this in the ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Priya. That was very helpful, very insightful. Now, I believe that social entrepreneurship is always going to be a juggle between your social and your entrepreneurship aspects of things. And in light of that, Shelly, if I may pose the next question to you, that how do you think that entrepreneurs can balance the need for profitability and financial stability with their commitments to social and environmental impact?
So, look, I think deep down, an entrepreneur, if he or she is a social entrepreneur, I think it boils down to the real purpose for which the business is being set up or the enterprise is being set up. That could be done at a certain scale with limited resources by an individual or a group of people. But for that to actually really scale and become more widespread, there needs to be capital available for that. And when we need capital, investors will expect some level of return. And these returns obviously are expected to match the market returns at a minimum, if not delivering more than the market returns. So a very sound business model is very, very essential, even if it is a social enterprise. Integrating technology, integrating some of the policy frameworks and government support benefits that are provided to the social and sustainability initiatives. The entrepreneur has to create a very viable business model, right? I look at this as three things coming together. One is the feasibility, which means having the right technology, the logistics, etc., to be able to make that business work. Having the right skill sets, right inputs, and so on. Viability, which is creating a business model, through which you could actually make money, make good returns. And the third part of it is being able to create demand, generate customer interest, create a desire in the buyers to actually opt for sustainable products and services. So there are all of these three aspects that need to come together to form a good business. And these three things come together in the context of the environment that is created by the government, right? In the kind of policy and in government initiatives that are being brought about. I think it has to be a viable business for it to be, the business in itself has to be sustainable for the sustainability theme to take off, right?
Definitely. That otherwise would somewhere defeat the whole purpose. So definitely a very main ingredient.
Very recently I was reading a report where in the last few quarters, ESG investors or ESG investments have actually delivered. They've underperformed the benchmark, right, by 2.5%. And now ESG portfolios are quite sizable, right? So you can expect that investors will be questioning the investment theses. They'll be looking at, hey, is this, for the alignment to the carbon net neutrality initiatives, what is the price that we are willing to pay, right? How much are we willing to compromise in terms of returns on our capital?
Very, very true. Thank you so much for the response, Shelly. And please feel free, if Priya, if you would want to add something to this, or Shelly, vice versa, please feel free to add your pointers to each other's questions as well, would be better for us. So moving on to the next, taking this discussion forward, while at one place, we are so glad that enterprises, sustainable green enterprises are coming from all nooks and corners of the country. However, with the population of India, that means it's a lot and lots of startups coming together for a single, it's just another competitive exam here, that how do I become the investor's favorite? So, and while it is very challenging at the entrepreneur's end, I'm sure it must be equally excruciating for the investors to be able to identify that one or that group of startups that you believe that will be able to make the change, will be able to bring the change that they pitch in their very first conversation. So how would you, Priya, if I may ask, determine if a company is investable? And what specifically do investors look for while investing in startups?
Yeah, great question. And I like the way you compared it with doing a competitive exam. I mean, the very large population of India, 1.4 billion now, the most populous country in the world. Definitely, there is a huge competition to make sure that the entrepreneurial talent is being seen and being adequately assessed by the funders, and they're getting the right opportunities to grow. The good news is that there are actually a lot of funders in India, a lot of types of, as I mentioned, equity, debt, grant capital. So I think the options are definitely much larger than they've ever been. So we're at a unique point in India's, I would say, sort of entrepreneurial journey. And this is one of those decades that I think there'll be a huge amount of companies coming to the fore. Of course, there will be some that may not make it, and then some that will grow astronomically. But it's an ingredient. Different types of startups have different ingredients that make them grow. So I think every case is different. But broadly speaking, for us, what we look at when we're analyzing or diligencing a company, we look at three major areas. And given that we're an early stage investor, we don't have very much data to go by, right? Some of the companies that we're investing in just started maybe 6 months ago or a year ago. So we're really going on the basis of the solidity of the idea and the kind of resilience of the entrepreneur. And so I'll go through each and every one. So I think the three areas we look at are, one is the team. The founding team has to be, a very solid sort of founder market fit, as we would call it. So I think adequately geared up to kind of address the problem that they're looking to solve by having the right kind of years of experience and the right kind of contacts and the right kind of skill makeup within their team, and recognizing where their gaps are, so that if one person is a salesperson, one person is a more of an ops person, and they're looking for a science or an R&D lead, they would go and actually proactively secure somebody before going for a fundraise, because that's the first question. If it's a very sort of science-heavy startup or a hardware-oriented startup, that's the first question an investor would ask: where are the gaps and how are you planning to solve for them? So that's one area, the founding team, because that's what you're essentially going to be betting on in the absence of previous financial data and the previous actual startup operating history. I think the second area that we look at with a lot of detail, where we want to be convinced, is basically the size of the market opportunity. So here is where we as a fund, it comes less from the startup and more from our own building of our thesis, is that we do a bunch of sector scans before we even go and approach companies or have conversations with them. So let's say in climate, there's multiple sectors, as I alluded to, and we're looking at, say, biotech, or we're looking at prop tech, or we're looking at hydrogen. We want to be very convinced that that sector has huge market opportunity and potential to grow. And so we do, analysis across, many different markets. We look at supply demand factors, we look at regulatory factors, we look at ways in which startups have raised capital in other countries compared with what's available here in India, and what are the sort of different policy mandates and support for this kind of space, and what are the large size of customers that they could potentially get in terms of orders. And then we make an assessment: okay, is this market and sector really going to grow? And then if we're really convinced about that, then we go and talk to a bunch of startups that are operating in this space. So that's number two. And the third one is really the technology. So here we're looking, we generally as a hardware technology based investor, we're looking at physical assets. So whether it's batteries or whether it's the sort of operational factory, or whether it's materials, or whether it's a process patent, etc. We're looking at essentially how defensible is this technology, and is it going to be able to scale up, and is the additional value that the startup is going to sort of gain over time going to be amplified by the strength of this technology and its uniqueness in the market. So that's sort of another area that we look at, and we get external experts to help us validate. So these three areas, I would say, form the crux of our evaluation. I think there's a bunch of other things we also do, which are all interrelated, like sort of references on team, and we look at other sort of companies. We look at competitive landscape. We look at kind of the funding needs of the company, and how capex heavy is it going to be, and how will it really grow over time in terms of the need, and also what are the kinds of late stage capital that this company can attract. So let's say we put the first few checks in, this company eventually has to keep raising from other sources of investment before becoming completely self-sustainable, or potentially they get to profitability sooner, but we need to have visibility on that. So that's what we would also do an assessment of. Is there enough interest from other funds in this company at a later stage? And then we would take a call on whether to invest or not. So that's a little bit of a brief on how we look at it.
Great. A very detailed and in-depth process, methodical process by the investors, and as well is, of course, very crucial to this entire process. Now, while we understand that there are so many expectations that we keep from an entrepreneur, all of us collectively also realize and acknowledge the fact that there are also some key challenges for a person who's stepped into an enterprising journey for himself or herself. And so which ones do you think, Shelly, would be some key challenges that sustainable entrepreneurs face when it comes to accessing financing? And how can these challenges be overcome? And as per your experience, what have been some of the most different experiences that you've had in terms of assessing entrepreneurs for financing opportunities?
Yeah, I'd say I think a lot of the important aspects that investors look at, Priya has very nicely covered, right? Assuming that those have been vetted already, right? We have a great team which seems to be committed. They're purposeful. The space they're operating, the idea they've brought to the table is good, and there is interest among the investors. I think the next biggest challenge that they'll have is to establish product market fit. Sometimes it can be very, very prolonged periods of time. It may take multiple iterations to be able to get there. But until that is found, the business is not going to scale. And through that process, there is a tendency that that people get distracted with too many things and too many variations of the idea. And I would say to remain true to the purpose and whatever is the product or solution that is being built, to be able to go through that process, and if there is a pivot required, to be able to very thoughtfully do that. I think that is very, very important if they have to get to the next point in the journey where they can get funding. And the good part is that most of the investors these days get deeply involved in helping the entrepreneurs through this process. It is not like an early stage investor is letting the entrepreneurs, the founders, go through this journey all by themselves. They have a lot of help, and there's a great professional ecosystem now within India that can offer more help to the entrepreneurs, to the founders. But I think it is the ability to go through this process in a very methodical way, having the resilience to deal with the ups and downs, to be able to overcome the obstacles, and then keeping at the job until you get to your next funding point. I think that's super critical. And even within the investor community, investors have their own theses for, especially the institutional investors have their own investment theses. So it's very important to identify which are the investors that will be interested in a business like ours, and invest that time, effort, and energy more productively in talking to those kind of investors, right? Many times, founders just do spray and pray and just try to approach everybody and anybody have and spend inordinate amount of time to go through that process to ultimately come to an investor which will really show interest. Doing it a little better, doing it a little smartly will help them really in optimizing the that journey to the next step.
I would this question is for both of you. Adding to the previous one only, that do you, if you could recall any instance, or have you had yourself any experience or have heard of something where an investor did not find 100% value in the pitch or the business model, however, trusted the founder more than their business idea, and they still decided to go ahead with the idea with them? It's like choosing the founder over the.
Yeah. So I'll not respond with names or specific examples, but there are many. Especially with second-time founders, it is quite common that investors will back them just because they have the credibility of delivering great outcomes for everyone. So it is not unheard of that investors get the backing just because of who is starting the business more than what the idea is, what's the potential of the business.
Yeah, I would also jump in and agree with that. Second-time founders generally have that capability of attracting investors without perhaps even an idea on paper. And they might be sort of shopping around for different ideas. They might pivot many times, in the first year, 2 years, etc. But because, they have those operational expertise and those sort of business chops, they're trusted by investors to kind of take it forward. And generally speaking, these investors might have known that founder throughout their first startup, or had been advising them, or been on the board, etc. So they would say something to the effect of, "We'll back anything that you do." And so that sometimes happens. We're actually, I think some sector-focused funds and sort of specific thesis-led funds are not as they don't make these kind of choices as frequently, but it depends. It depends that sometimes there's sometimes I would say a vertical of experimental, bets that funds can take, and these can fall under them. But usually it's sort of done as a form of like trusting the entrepreneur that they can carry out the business idea to sort of to deliver full outcomes, as Shailendra was mentioning.
Great, that's great. Okay, so Priya, my next question is to you. So from an entrepreneur's point of view, what do you think are the do's and don'ts while seeking funding from an investor? And if you would like to give any specific advice for entrepreneurs working in climate-specific sectors such as renewable energy, waste management, sustainable tourism, food tech, mobility. So any specific advice, and what are the do's and don'ts?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a few from my side in terms of do's. I would say definitely have a timeline on how you want to plan your fundraise. So I think I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who kind of start talking to folks, and then it gets sort of dragged from one month to the next month to the next month. I think it helps to have to approach investors and say, hey, I would like to raise funds by this particular date, and these are the kinds of sort of other folks that I'm also speaking to, and run it like a very efficient process. And I think that's where investors also get very I would say, impressed with founders that are very organized about the way they're going about their fundraise. So some of the best companies that we've backed have come to us, with a very strict timeline, and they've also said that this is the data room, this is the kind of research that we've done, these are the kind of competitive landscapes, this is the market sizing. So it makes the investor's job really easy, and that's one area that I think the founders can definitely succeed in and move fast. And it's just a planning process. The second is, I think, know exactly what you're fundraising for in terms of what are your use of funds and how can they best be kind of split across, let's say, R&D, operating expenses, team, strategic sort of growth, expansion, working capital, and then learn how to kind of position that properly so investors know where their money is going. That's one. And then also know sort of how long you can really last with that investor capital. So what is the kind of cash runway, as it were, and then that would give a good idea to investors. It's all part of like the whole being prepped in terms of going first to your fundraise. And third is, I think, have a very, I would say, structured list of the type of investors that you want to approach. So different founders have different comfort levels with institutional funds. I would say if you're first starting out, it might be best to sort of run like a family and friends round, and then get some starting capital in the bank, and then do a bunch of pilots, and then prove your traction a little bit, get a few customers, and then go for institutional funds. Again, if you're a second-time founder, it might be easier to get institutional funds right away. But typically, it's not as easy. So it's good to have your sort of trusted early backers in the beginning, and then eventually build up to sort of secure institutional capital. And those are the kinds of things I would say to do. I would also say on the don't side, I would say don't, I think, kind of oversell your capabilities. I think investors generally tend to be able to look at, they like people who have a story, obviously, but if you're planning to sort of aim for things that are perhaps not achievable with the skill set or the team that you're building on, kind of, I think it'll look like you're actually trying to do too many things and trying to be a bit too spread out, which can sometimes lead to investors backing out or not being as convinced or having that kind of conviction on your model. So that's one thing, is just to be fairly focused and very kind of narrow about what you want to achieve, and then going out and start actually fundraising for that. Those are some of the areas. And I would say be kind of mindful about, like I said, cash burn, operating expenses, etc., which is part of running a process. So these are kind of some of the areas I would let my view. I don't know, Shailendra, you have any thoughts, because you're also a founder as well. You've gone through the whole fundraising process.
No, I think you've pretty much covered all the important aspects, Priya. Yeah, I know. I'm just thinking if there's anything else that I can add to it. No, nothing specific. All that I'll say is, maybe for founders who are at the ideation phase, maybe let me just add one thing that I sometimes feel people miss out. Don't always look for the most obvious problem to solve, and don't always look for the most glamorous problem to solve. If it is very glamorous and very obvious, there are probably plenty of other people also thinking about it. Look for problems that are second degree, right? Problems that will only get uncovered when the first level of problems have been solved for, or when somebody is already trying to solve for the first level problem. So there are a lot of hidden opportunities. You just need to be able to look deeper and really critically evaluate where it is. And some of the most scalable businesses are ones that may not have the sheen of a fully digital business or a fully B2C type of setup. So there are some great opportunities that are hidden underneath. It just needs a little more scrutiny, a little more detailed evaluation and thinking through, right? And obviously with the help of subject matter experts or industry experts, right? I mean, just to give you, if I have to give you an example, if I told you there are 1,000 or nearly 1,000 EV companies, startups in India. Everybody is trying to solve for EVs, and making a shiny new scooter is the next big thing, and everybody is running around trying to solve for that. And there are many founders who are now thinking, okay, now if people start having EVs, what do we do with all the charging, right? Challenges that. So people are the second degree problem is ensuring that the charging problem is solved. If we ever get to a point where there are n number of users, and charging will be there'll be congestion, right? And then once charging issue is sorted, and you think you have a solution, then the operations around that charging, right? What are the logistics requirements? What are the input requirements, people, workforce requirements, right? How do you provide all of that for that ecosystem to work? So you're looking at the next degree of problem. So this usually comes as the layers of the problems are solved or peeled, but you could actually think ahead and really be solving for the problem.
Definitely. So it need not, it shouldn't neither be too obvious nor too glamorous.
Not that you should not solve glamorous problems, but yeah, you should not always be looking for those, right?
But I completely agree, and which brings me to the next thought that we talk about every time we talk about green financing or climate conscious enterprises. There's so much that efforts that are coming in from the urban areas or the metropolitans across the country, or from the top tier of educational institutions in this country, all the IITs, IIMs, and the likes. However, this country has seen some of the most significant and most impactful enterprises that have come in from rural India. So how do we ensure, both at the investor level and at the policy makers level, that climate financing or financing sustainable enterprises is a more inclusive process? And in that, what are the steps that policy makers have already, according to you, or both policy makers and investors have already shown that, okay, this is not the background of the entrepreneur, this is not the, the connect, not maybe the experience, but definitely there is a possibility, there is a promising, the idea is promising, and we see that future. So how do you ensure that more and more such ideas and people come to the fore? And Shelly, if you would like to answer, Priya, both of you, this is open to both.
I think I'll let Priya
go first. How can we make this process more inclusive?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a really crucial question. I think making sure that climate finance does trickle down to all of the areas, tier 2, tier 3 cities, and all of the sort of underrepresented populations demographically. So one of the interesting things that has been done is basically SIDBI, one of the large banks, has basically proposed a blended finance facility, which will then bring down interest rates to around 14% or so. And this is for asset financing or lending to green startups. There's one thing that's quite interesting about it is that usually, these kinds of lending facilities are around 20 to 24%, especially when you're looking at electric vehicle transportation and lending for those assets. The reason why they're able to get this interest rate down is because they have a foundation, the Shell Foundation, which is providing a first loss, and then the World Bank, which is providing a second loss credit guarantee facility. So these kinds of things in the blended finance sort of landscape really help when you have different types of sort of financing coming together, helping to kind of reduce cost of capital for green financing, and that in turn will make it much more affordable for tier 2, tier 3 sort of companies that are building in this space to basically get access to capital. So this is more on the debt side, but I just wanted to highlight it as one potential example of ways in which you have more inclusivity. The second one is in the grant space. So obviously the government has done a huge number of sort of grant schemes, and even through Startup India and even through Niti Aayog and others, to basically bring enough awareness to companies that are operating outside the tier 1 cities, outside the tier 1 educational institutions, and giving them that opportunity to sort of bring startup and bring sort of early capital into their business, and then eventually give them the training and the capacity building to go and pitch to tier 1 investors or folks that are sort of even international folks as well. So there's many different programs that are running on this front, incubation programs as well. And there's in the clean tech space particularly, there are a lot of interesting kind of collaboratives that are working on this. So for example, Tata Trust has a sort of incubator called Social Alpha, where they have run multiple programs for companies across the different spheres, and they don't have to be from tier 1 cities. Similarly, Climate Collective is another incubator that runs it. I'm actually on the board of a sustainability sort of founder coalition called Sustainability Mafia, which is 75 plus climate tech founders, and all of them come from different parts of the country, and every one of them is given sort of a collaborative opportunity to meet corporates, to meet investors by just paying a small membership fee. So I think these kinds of ecosystem development kind of activities are already there in the ecosystem. Already there in the community. It's just a question of tapping into it and knowing about them upfront. And I think that can be much, kind of enhanced over the coming years.
And just adding to what Priya said, as of now, I think the startup ecosystem and all the government initiatives, right, it's extended beyond tier 1 cities. That's for sure, right? Tier 2s and tier 3s. But going back to your question, has it extended to rural India? Not really. Honestly speaking, I don't think, especially when we talk about startups or tech-led startups, you don't see any of them coming from there, right? That is for lack of market, lack of founders, lack of know-how, lack of capital. So ultimately, these will have to get clustered around tier 1 and tier 2 cities. That's the way it's going to take off. But in a different sense, there are many platforms and tech startups that are trying to create this VLE model, which is called a village level entrepreneur model. Think of them as micro entrepreneurs in their own villages or towns that get the ability to conduct business and manage their entire setup by aligning themselves to a platform that is structuring and standardizing some product or service, and they get the backing of that startup. So those are happening, but to say big ideas coming from rural India, not really. That's my view.
Definitely. It's very apparent, that gap, both in terms of idea, the accessibility of those ideas, and the inclusivity of the larger ecosystem. But that's been very insightful, and I could go on. There are so many other queries coming to me and so many other questions that I want to ask, but let's also give the opportunity to our digital audiences. If anybody has questions, we've already got a couple of them in our chat box. Please drop in your questions, and we would pass it on to our panelists. There is one from Lavanya B. It reads, how to refine a successful model and pitch deck. Successful business model and pitch deck.
So does this refer to, basically, I'm understanding, that already existing pitch deck that a founder wants to basically know how to make more impactful, right?
Yeah, so
that right?
that's refining. So yeah.
Yeah, understood. So I can take a stab at this, but yeah, happy for you to jump in anytime, Shailendra. So yeah, I mean, for us, when we look at pitch decks, we like to look at fairly short pitch decks, so not those that go on and on for forever. Usually they have clearly marked sections, and usually they're the ones that kind of are the most important and kind of jump out of the page. So generally speaking, we look at, the market opportunity, as I mentioned, the problem, what the startup is solving for, the technology, and then the sort of relevance of the startup's product or service to sort of to basically solving for that market opportunity. We then look at the team of the startup, and then having a few slides talking about the team's background and expertise, and then talking about some successful pilots or projects that the startup has already instituted, or some logos of customers that they've already got sort of early contracts with, and maybe some early financials, or even if they don't have revenue yet, at least a planned I would say financial forecast for the next few years, as well as the unit economics and margin analysis, and then maybe some social media and kind of I would say mentions that they've had, whether it's interviews or podcasts or things like that, those kinds of snippets. So that's what we would consider as a good start to a conversation. If the startup is also able to show that they have benefited from good mentors and good advisors, that's always really helpful too, because it shows that they've thought deeply about the kind of business that they're building, and they've sought some good strategic expertise and advisors on their board as well. So that's always helpful. And then lastly, I mean, going back to the first section, I think being as detailed as possible in the market opportunity section, knowing exactly the kind of breadth of the problem that you're addressing, putting enough statistics in there, and then referencing a bunch of research is always helpful, and can definitely look to interest investors to begin with, especially if it's a sector that they're already looking at and wanting to see what's so different about your company. Finally, the last thing to add is probably an analysis of the competition, which is something that one should always put in a deck, because otherwise the investor would think, does this company think they have no competition at all? So even if you feel like you're the first and the only mover in the whole market, it would be helpful to put at least those folks who are operating outside your geographical area and who have done something similar, to show where you are on that axis, and then how you're different and what your USP is.
Yeah, I think Priya has pretty much covered everything. And if it is pre-revenue, I'd say some sort of traction or user metrics would be useful. If it is post-revenue, some sort of financial trends and performance metrics would be useful.
There's another question. How do you balance social impact and financial sustainability in your startup? I believe we've covered some parts of this in the initial couple of questions, but if you would like to add anything to the previous discussion.
Yeah, now maybe I'll just make one statement.
Yes.
Financial investors are not really investing for impact, right? They're investing in businesses with impact, right? I mean, they want the business to be a business and create the impact, and that in itself will require that the sustainability impact or the social impact balances with the expectations of investors, and with a robust business model.
That very well lays it. One last, okay. Where can we get funding? What is the process to approach potential investors? This is the next question. So where can we get funding?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different avenues, right? And I know it seems very intimidating for a startup who's just getting initiated on their journey, but I think one would need to do a little bit of a research on some of the stages of capital that you're looking for. So again, going back to my other point about being organized about the fundraise and about like planning for your growth in general. I would think it would be good to start with what kind of capital do you need now? So if it's friends and family, you know where to go. If it's in terms of institutional investors and you don't have any idea of who these institutional investors are, it's probably best to kind of tap into your own network. Maybe it's through LinkedIn, maybe it's through your college network, maybe it's through your professional network, and then talk to other folks who are existing founders or where they have raised in the past. I think another very good avenue is through incubators and accelerators. So there's so many of them, as I mentioned earlier, depending on which sector and you're looking at, tapping into those, at least applying to a bunch of incubators. And, you know, there's many of them do a lot of sort of outreach on social media and try and get bunch of applications already through. But that is a great way, because if you go through a 3-month or 6-month intensive incubator program or acceleration program, part of the main ROIs of that program is to essentially get funding. So these startup accelerators actually have you know, workshops, dedicated workshops on strategy and financial modeling and you know, marketing and, you know, product management. And, you know, at the end of it, you pitch in a demo day to a whole bunch of investors. And that's the whole, you know, attraction of this. And from there, you can start making a whole bunch of connections. So I think if you're an early stage startup, going through an accelerator incubator is a really good way to start. And then you can basically, once you've been in there for like a few months, you can automatically, your network just multiplies.
I completely second your thought, Priya. And Youth CoLab has been one such experience for me as well. So, Marian, if I could ask one last question, and then we move on to wrapping up the session. Okay, this is a very it's the 2 questions. One is, what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs who are seeking financial investments? And the second question is that how should one develop risk-taking abilities? An entrepreneur develop risk-taking abilities. So last 2 questions, and
okay, so maybe I'll take the first one. You know, the very obvious things that people will tell you when you ask for this advice, people will say, you know, stay true to your passion, continuously learn and build your network, be innovative, stay customer focused. All of that is true. But, you know, I will only give 2 things as advice to young entrepreneurs. First one is financial discipline. Whether you're funded or not, right from day one, it's extremely important to be, you know, managing your finances very, very well. You know, whether you have, you know, runway for a month, for 6 months, you need to be able to manage your finances very, very tightly. That discipline is going to be enormously useful and important as you get, you know, funding, and you'll be able to make the most of the money that you get, even after you get that. And the second one is to you know, develop resilience. For somebody who's starting out new and hears all the news about you know, startups getting funded and all the glorious milestones they've achieved, you know, you tend to get carried away with the feeling that, okay, it is but a natural process to get there. But what you don't get to see and hear through all this news and noise is the hard work that goes in, are the ups and downs that the startups face, and the challenges and obstacles that they come across. So to be able to mentally prepare for that, to face those challenging times, challenging days, and going through that rigor, that is very, very important to prepare right up front.
Yeah, and maybe, oh, sorry to interrupt.
please, Priya.
I completely second what Shailendra said. Just to add on the second question, I think risk-taking abilities, it is hard as an entrepreneur to kind of push yourself to take risk. Some people are more naturally prone to doing that, and others are a little bit risk averse. So I think within boundaries, if you're able to kind of take risks that allow for growth and allow for both growth on the operations and the business side, but also growth of and scale of impact, that will always benefit, you know, your business, as long as it's sensible growth, and as Shailendra very rightly said, managed with good financial discipline, you'll be able to, as an entrepreneur, really succeed. So I think don't be afraid of some of the big scary sort of choices. I think definitely have a good network of mentors and strategic advisors around you that can help you, and people who've already built businesses before and can see you know, the path ahead potentially, and help you kind of navigate some of those uncharted waters. But I think the idea in an entrepreneurship, at least if you want to build big, is to actually, and dream big, is to basically take risks, and to sort of hire people, take a bet on people, obviously do all your reference checks, etc. But make sure that, you know, if you're lucky enough to raise capital, that you use it well, and that you kind of show your investors and show yourself as a team very sort of ambitious and also sensible way. Grow your team, develop new products, expand to new areas, and think about, you know, ways, because this is your one opportunity to basically take those risks as an early stage entrepreneur. And as you grow, you know, with your business, you'll start getting larger numbers of investors being interested, but then at that point you'll also start kind of losing equity ownership over your business, so you may not be able to take as many very, very large risks. So yeah, this is the kind of I would say trajectory that I would recommend for entrepreneurs who are looking to take risk.
Thank you so much, Priya, and such insightful responses. And I am taking back so much with me from this conversation, and I wished for it to only last longer, but due to time constraints, as we move towards the end of the session, thank you so much, Youth CoLab, Marian, and most definitely Priya and Shelley, for your time. From this session today, as an entrepreneur myself, I do not just take back with me how much an entrepreneur needs to evolve in the process, needs to learn newer things, needs to approach investors, but I'm also so sensitized with the idea that investors go through so much in identifying the right entrepreneur to invest their time, energy, and of course money into. How important it is to learn and unlearn today's evolving technology and data and climate change entrepreneurial models. And a very integral part of this entire process is the humanness of the process of financing startups. How very often than not, humanness comes in as a very critical parameter to identify the startups that could be funded for sustainable and climate conscious responses. Thank you so much for your time, for answering all the questions, and looking forward to furthering this collaboration, furthering this dialogue on various multiple forums hereafter. Your closing remarks, and then over to you, Marian.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Shailendra. Any additional point from both of you?
No, thank you. I just want to appreciate all the good work that you guys have been doing. The entire startup ecosystem, all the aspiring young founders, they're all benefiting from the good work. Just want to pass on the appreciations, and happy to help in any which way. I'm glad that you invited us. Thank you.
Yes, likewise from my side. Such a pleasure to participate. Thank you for such a well-curated set of questions and discussion. And I hope it was helpful for the audience, and look forward to participating in more sessions like this in the future.
Thank you both. See you soon at work or on YouTube.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wishing everybody a nice